Yeah, welcome. Well, today we have the great honor to be with an extraordinary person based in Washington, D.C., who's been our guest before, and that's Will Allen, who's been an officer on Air Force One in three administrations. I believe it was Bush Sr., Bush Jr., and Clinton, and who has
Actually, it's Ronald Reagan,
oh,
Bush Senior, and Clinton.
sorry, you're absolutely right. and and um, and whose website www.ufodc. They're an extraordinary group of photographs of UFO activity, principally over the U.S. Capitol and the White House area, and that restricted area over the Capitol, the mall, the White House. And I guess that's one of the areas we like to focus on today. First of all, for those viewers that may be just tuning in, you write on your website, you say, I am, I forget the exact terms you say, but I'm being monitored by very advanced technology. What exactly do you mean by that?
Well, my physical data clearly shows that wherever I go, there seems to be a plethora of airborne anomalies. And it's interesting that one particular anomaly, one object that I photographed June of last year, seems to consistently be following me around. And I have physical samples showing the same object in close proximity to wherever I go.
Right. Now, is that a human object, or is it an interdimensional or extraterrestrial object?
I would
What's your best
assume the
guess?
second, because it could not be anything of man by the fact that it demonstrated very unusual capabilities in the sense that it was able to go between matter. And in particular, this sample that I have shows this object coming out of a wall of an abandoned church. So
Ah,
whatever these objects are, they have the ability to go through solid matter. And it makes one think that there's a very strong possibility that there may be bases that are contained within the earth, underground, inside mountains, in various locations in various cities that have underground infrastructures, that these extraterrestrials may just be based down there.
right. Now, you've in fact had experiences where you've documented or seen UFOs coming out from underwater in the Washington D.C. area, correct?
Yes, I did. On December 28th, 2009, I imaged a series of shots taken at the Potomac River where people keep their yachts and live in these areas. It's a living a dwelling for people who live on boats. And in the sample, I photographed two light sources that were unaffected by the tidal currents of the Potomac River. What's interesting is 20 minutes after I photographed these objects, 4 miles from where I photographed them, a young lady in Fort Washington, Maryland, witnessed a star-like anomaly exiting the Potomac River. So it was consistent with the objects that I photographed when I had my encounter, and 20 minutes later for someone to see the object coming out of the water was icing on the cake, especially when what she described matched the photographs that I took.
Right. Now, um, what do you think these objects are? I mean, are they a particular extraterrestrial race? Are they U.S. government black budget secret objects? What's your best guess here?
Uh, I couldn't make a logical assumption as to what they are. I can tell you that I don't think we have technology that would be at that level of sophistication, especially when my samples clearly showed that the tidal currents which affected the boats in the water above surface did absolutely nothing to the stationary lights that were photographed. And it's interesting that the sequence of shots clearly show the tidal forces of the river going over the objects, and the boat's moving, but the object's not moving at all.
Right.
Very unaffected by the forces of the water.
Now, one of the areas that I wanted to ask you about, and this is a very significant date because all Americans know it, and that's July 4th, and that's the Declaration of Independence from the British Crown. And you've had significant experiences in that it seems that a relatively large number of July 4ths over the past recent years, you've had significant photographs taken of UFO phenomenon. And I wondered if you could start with this most recent July 4th, 2011.
Okay, on the past 4th of July, I usually film the fireworks from a specific location at the base of the Washington Monument. And I tried to match what I did last year at the same location. But ironically, I took 1,584 pictures of the fireworks display. And in the 1,584 pictures, there were 6 frames in a row which showed a black cylinder-like anomaly pass through the smoke and flames of the fireworks. And as it passed through the smoke and flames of the fireworks, it seemed to absorb the light being dispersed by the exploding fireworks. It's interesting that the 6 frames represent 1.5 seconds of action, so it flew from south to north in 1.5 seconds of these images and maintained a course headed towards the 14th Street Bridge and Reagan National Airport. It's interesting looking at Newport reports that there were individuals who were on the 14th Street Bridge that witnessed the anomaly that I photographed after it flew out of my field of vision and flew into their field of vision. It was witnessed by people who were sitting in a car. Very, very abstract.
Right. Now, there was also an event that you filmed on July 4th, 2010.
Well, it's interesting. I photographed on July the 4th in 2010, I believe I filmed 2,500 images. And in one frame out of the 2,500 images were 2 airborne anomalies. Now, it just so happens that during the day, but before the fireworks display started on the 4th of July, this past 4th of July, that I imaged the same 2 objects that I photographed in 2010, except this time one of the objects was above a crew of people that were based out in the field waiting for the fireworks display to start, and the other one was midway up the height of the Washington Monument. But it was consistent with the shots that I took in 2010. In fact, the anomalies looked exactly the same, except this round they were a little bit more luminous.
Now, you also photographed UFOs, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, in July 4th, 2002. Is that correct?
It is exactly the same scenario, except in 2002, I was using film technology, and I filmed the fireworks display for the city of Washington. And in my shots from 2002 were 5 frames in particular that showed objects as they entered into our space. One particular object was a blue and yellow object, which on the 26th of July 2002 was chased by 2 F-16s in the Waldorf area, Waldorf, Maryland. So whatever this object was, I imaged it entering into our airspace, and it entered into our airspace through a wormhole of sorts, which on the film sample itself was represented as a plume, as if something was being discharged from the barrel of a gun, and it was very abstract how this object suddenly appears in the frames.
Now, you have were any of the UFOs that appeared on these July 4th dates, were any of those chased by any U.S. Air Force vehicles?
On the 4th, absolutely not, but days later, the same objects that were imaged were chased by U.S. Air Force F-16s. And it's interesting that the objects that I imaged in 2002 were also witnessed by Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong during the Apollo 16 mission on the moon. They were consistently the same.
Yeah. When you say the same vehicles, you mean vehicles that are similar or of the same type, or the identical vehicles?
Apparently, on the sample that I have that shows Buzz Aldrin on the moon surface, the image was taken by Neil Armstrong, the front visor of Buzz Aldrin's spacesuit showed a blue, yellow, and green anomaly on the very corner of his visor. When I did a comparative analysis to the anomaly on his visor and the anomaly that I photographed as it exited through what I think to be a wormhole in the sky, it showed that both of these objects were consistently the same. Even more interesting is an object that was imaged by Buzz Aldrin during Apollo 16 showing a large dome-like anomaly sitting on the surface of the moon. I imaged the same object over the Baltimore harbor on August the 3rd, 2008, and did a comparative analysis of both of these objects. And the object I photographed in Baltimore and the object on the moon, based on the NASA sample, were 100% the same.
And is the analysis the same as that object that was being chased by the F-16 in Maryland? I believe it was
100% match. And it's interesting that the military denied that they made contact, but yet there were witnesses on the ground, several hundreds of people, that claimed that this blue object was being chased by F-16s and that this blue object left the F-16s in the dust.
And what date was that again? July 6th?
That was July 26, 2002.
Right. Now, was that the last public event publicly in... No, you mentioned a July 2008 event in which there was a public chase that was documented.
There have been several events that are documented, but the interesting thing is that those particular events, though they were documented and witnessed by people on the ground, are being denied by the United States military. And in fact, that they denied even sending jets up to intercept anything at that day. So there's still a level of, how should I say, they're trying to cover things up here. They don't want people to know about a lot of the activity that's taking place here. And with the physical data that I'm able to capture with the technology that I'm using, it clearly indicates that our airspace is constantly being visited by outside sources.
Now, the fact that that U.S. Air Force jets are being sent up to in a chase, in a pursuit, indicates that they assume that these objects are hostile. Would you agree? Or?
Well, I don't think that it would necessarily mean that they're hostile. What they do is they have a perimeter, and once an object enters into that perimeter, it's justifiable to send up precautionary measures to ensure that whatever the anomalies are would not necessarily be hostile. But none of the events that I've encountered, none of the objects that I've been face-to-face with have ever been hostile.
Right. And you have also photographed UFOs landing on, for example, congressional office buildings and on the
Got
U.S.
it.
Capitol.
I've got an object which landed on the roof house side of the U.S. Capitol building.
Correct. What do you think the intelligence behind these events is doing?
You know, I couldn't speculate, but it's interesting from what my associate Robert Stanley mentioned on 1952 during the event where the objects passed by the Washington, U.S. Capitol dome, rather. One of the objects was shot down, and pieces of that object were pulled into the U.S. Capitol building for storage. And it's a very strong possibility that whatever these objects are that are visiting the Capitol building may be looking for technology that was down 50 years ago. It's a very strong possibility. But I couldn't speculate. I do not know what their agenda is or what they're doing here.
They've even sort of gained over the White House. I know that you have that there's a series of photographs that you've done that it looks like there's gaming between different series of UFOs occurring late at night over the White House. Is that correct?
July the 20th, 2010 is the object that I think you're talking about, where I took 10 frames and 10 frames from a stationary platform. And I sent those 10 frames to my associate, Dr. Bruce Maccabee, who did extensive research on the samples. And he indicated that the object went from 0 to 200 miles an hour in under 2 seconds. So we have no technology that has that type of acceleration. We also don't have a technology that would project an energy beam and allow the energy beam to bend. And that was really abstract because light does not have the characteristics of string per se, and it cannot be bent. But the sample clearly shows that whatever this object was, it projected an energy beam that was bending. And it's very unusual indeed. It's also consistent with objects that were photographed during a White House news conference. My associate Robert sent me the samples to those. And the objects during this White House news conference were exactly the same as the object that projected the plasma beam, which was in the airspace above the White House during the time of the photograph.
So there are photographs of a UFO during a White House news conference?
Yes. Several. There were 3 UFOs in this conference, and they all... See, what we do is we do a comparative analysis, and we look at the physical data that we have, and we compare it to other pieces of information, which is what I was able to do with the objects I photographed in 2002 at the U.S. Capitol building, the green objects. I took physical samples from other parts of the United States and other parts of the world and matched them with these objects from the U.S. Capitol building, which, by the way, the objects that I did image was similar to the object that crashed into a village in Peru in 2008, which the United States military quarantined the entire village. But they claimed that the object that crashed was a meteor. It was consistent with the objects that I photographed at the U.S. Capitol building. Therefore, the object was not a meteor that crashed in Peru. It was a spacecraft.
Right. What was the date of that White House press conference, or during...
I would have to get that information from Robert, because Robert was the one who provided me with that specific piece of evidence.
Okay.
And again, I took Robert's sample and I matched Robert's sample with the samples that I photographed July the 20th in 2010, and they were 100% exactly the same. So whatever this technology is, it is here, and it is in the airspace of Washington, D.C.
Yeah. Now, have you attempted to offer this information to an official source at all?
I share my information with anyone and everyone that is interested in the data. And I do have my sources at Langley that do look at my information closely, but I'm not withholding evidence. I'm not doing anything that would be contrary, other than trying to help those people who should know what exactly is going on in our airspace.
Now, Will, we have drafted a piece of legislation called the Extraterrestrial Disclosure Act of 2012. And I think that you may have seen a draft of that.
Yes, I did.
And basically, what it calls for, it names a whole series of agencies of the U.S. government that would have, presumed to have, information regarding UFOs and extraterrestrials. And what it does is it says, commencing at the end of 2012, each agency would make public a summary of their contacts with extraterrestrial biological entities for the previous year. So that on December 31st, 2012, you know, I know it's near that magical date, but I think that some people, you know, we still have an Earth.
Well, you know, you have to consider too that, you know, there was a whole bunch of hype for Y2K, and what happened Y2K?
Right,
Absolutely
right.
nothing.
Right.
So
yeah,
you can't base everything on this hysteria.
So that on December 31st, 2012, the end of that calendar year, they would release a public summary of all contacts by any personnel in their agency or any projects that they have that have contacts with extraterrestrial biological entities. And I'm very happy to say that I just received a written endorsement of the act from Dr. Stephen Greer. Of course, I was a Disclosure Project witness. And as well from Robert M. Stanley, whom you know. And I'm wondering, would you be able to work with us to approach people within the U.S. Congress or their staffs with the act and with your evidence, just to show that this is a routine matter? I believe that one of the agencies that's named in the act is the U.S. Capitol Police, who we know have files on these UFOs that are appearing over the U.S. Capitol, because that's their jurisdiction.
But you see, the problem there becomes it's not necessarily the jurisdiction of the U.S. Capitol Police, because see, on the ground of the Capitol, they're in power. In the air of the Capitol, that becomes national security, and that's a little bit outside of their jurisdiction. And that was indeed the case when I made my presentation to the investigating detective at the U.S. Capitol building. And basically, as mentioned, he did say to me that, Mr. Allen, all your photographs do is substantiate what officers on the ground had reported that day. So he's acknowledging that that did take place.
Yeah.
But outside of the jurisdiction of the U.S. Capitol Police, it is definitely outside their jurisdiction, because his saying to me that no crime took place, and therefore their hands were tied, nothing they could do about it, and there was indeed nothing they could do about it. But the actual event itself, though it did take place at the U.S. Capitol building, was in the airspace of the U.S. Capitol, not the U.S. Capitol itself. And that's outside the Capitol Police jurisdiction.
Oh, sure. But if we look at the act, there are a whole slew of other military and intelligence agencies that are named.
That would be in the investigation of the event.
And the people that we would be speaking to would be the Congress people and their staffs, where you say, look, here's the bill, here's the evidence, and all that we're saying is that these agencies for sure have the evidence, because they are sweeping this area every day.
But see, they don't want to put that out, Alfred, because there's the very strong possibility that, you know, most of the people who look at this information would react the same way they reacted when they did the radio story about the Martians landing back in the day.
Oh, yeah. No, right.
Generates hysteria, and they know that this will happen.
No, I mean, but back in 1938, we had Adolf Hitler in Germany. We had the Germans and the Japanese about to fight the Americans, and we had a whole different scene. So now we're in the 21st century, and it's just a matter of logic.
Exactly.
On any bill, you're going to have certain parties. We saw that during the recent debt crisis. You have parties saying, no, not me. Don't gore my ox, gore that ox. and so we would go and we would have this bill that says, look, these agencies, and we know that specific agencies sweep this area and would have records of this, and here's the evidence of this occurring, and all we're saying is that it's time to get this on the record so that once a year you have a public summary just to make it official and get all of this stuff out of the closet. And the people that we're talking to are those that are charged by the Constitution to make laws, and it's a simple bill. So all that I'm saying is that you, as an expert witness, would be there, what's called qualifying your photographs. Say, yes, I took this photograph.
I definitely would be in that position. But see, keep in mind, even with the physical data, I still have people who will deny the physical evidence as real. So there's still a lot to be done here, and there's still people who need to be convinced. They're so adamant about the fact that there is no life outside this atmosphere, and there we have a problem. And those are the people that are in positions of power, and their perceptions of reality are distorted. So we're not going to get total disclosure here, and they're not going to give you the big picture. They're not going to tell you this stuff is real because they don't want people to know that it's real. They want to keep this under wraps until the time comes when they have to bring it out in the public, and that would be when all the ships start showing up in our atmosphere.
Or even then, I mean, the legislative process has always been about different points of view, and at least we're not in the stage where they would burn people like you and me at the stake now for getting up and saying, hey, guess what? The earth isn't flat anymore.
But they still have their ways of getting at us and making us seem as if we're psychologically and emotionally unstable, which is not necessarily the case. Again, I'm dealing specifically with facts here, and I show people facts. If they accept the facts, that's one thing. If they're not able to accept the facts, that's another. And I'm not going to try to force a horse to drink the water.
No.
There's only so much we can do here.
But what I'm saying is this: if we can locate a friendly congressperson with a friendly staff that says, yes, I'm interested in this subject, can you give me a briefing? Then wouldn't it be worthwhile to just take a couple of hours out of one's day to walk down to Capitol Hill or up to Capitol Hill?
I would say so, and I would say a person of interest would be former Senator John Glenn. And one of the things I've got to mention is one of my associates, who is a dear friend of mine, just happens to tell me that he saw aliens around John Glenn at the Capitol. And as he saw these entities around John Glenn, it forced him to become psychologically unstable. Which, interestingly enough, a year later, I had the close encounter with the green objects in Lower Senate Park. So to me, there's a lot to be said, and there's a very strong possibility that extraterrestrials have infiltrated the U.S. Capitol building.
Oh, yeah. And in fact, I think that your friend, and I'm not violating any confidences here because it's been published now in the book, is a former ABC newsman, I think.
Former White House senior supervisor engineer.
Yeah, and who they think, because of the electromagnetics, this is one of the theories, because of the electromagnetics surrounding the equipment that he had to operate, that those electromagnetics rendered the extraterrestrials surrounding John Glenn visible to him, and they were not visible to others.
You know, that is a very, very strong possibility because I'll get samples and we'll be around people as I get these samples and they won't see a thing, but yet I would see it. So it's almost selective in a sense that they choose who they want to see these things. They choose if you are allowed to see them. And it's interesting that as my encounter would take place when I was a child in England, that perhaps these entities were preparing me for this particular day and the events that I'm photographing.
Right. Now, what do you think your sort of how do you approach your work there? I mean, you're kind of in a unique role in that you have extraordinary talents as a photographer, and at the same time, you say that you're being either signaled or monitored by the intelligence behind some of these UFO phenomena, such that you're there when they come through their wormholes. Would you speak of yourself as a contactee, or is that something?
I am a contactee, and again, it all started when I was a child in England at a place called Skullthorpe. And when I woke up, there were 5 or 6 small humanoids, grays, silver spacesuits, looked exactly like what are being rendered as gray ETs, came into my room and partially immobilized me in a sense that I was able to look at them as they were coming into my room, and they seemed to be shocked to see that I was still awake. But it was interesting that I tried to run and I couldn't get my legs to work, and I tried to scream and I couldn't get my voice to work. So it partially immobilized me, but in a sense it didn't, so that I was able to see exactly what I was dealing with. And from that point on, my life has been a very, very unusual thing to go through. And some of the events that I've had to deal with growing up, I could not explain, but now that I have the technology to capture them, I think it's a little different when you're showing the event versus talking about something, and I'm able to physically show what I'm talking about, and very few people have that ability to document this level of activity as I have with UFODC.com.
Right. Where do you think this is all going?
I honestly could not answer that because I was asked that very same question by George Norrie, and again, I other than the physical samples that I'm able to show you, I could not speculate as to why they're here, what they want, or anything of that nature, other than I get a signal to step outside and take a few shots, and when I step outside and take a few shots, these shots would always have airborne anomalies, UFOs.
It would seem that official departments would take a high degree of interest in seeing your data, and I guess you are saying that through informal back channels, you're able to share it with them. Do you ever get any feedback from them?
I get acknowledgement, and you know, there's a lot said in saying nothing, and there's a lot said in acknowledging something without saying something. So I'm getting the non-verbal acknowledgement of my physical data. But again, I still have to substantiate that which I photograph, and to do so, I have to look at other possibilities and other reports of those events. And one of the sites that I do utilize is Peter Davenport's website and the Newfork data that's posted on his page. The Newfork data is a idea of what other people are seeing, and the idea of what other people are seeing are matching the photographs that I'm taking, so I'm able to forensically substantiate the samples that I get with reports on Newfork. So there is documentation substantiating everything that I do.
Do you have plans for a book?
I've got several books up right now. I've got several books up. I've got ebooks on Lulu, UFO Forensic Files, and I've got printed books on Amazon.com. And again, you'd have to Google in or search in UFO Forensic Files on Amazon. It'll take you directly to my books and my videos.
And are your books a collection of your?
It's a collection of all of the objects that I photographed in the time that I was able to physically document these airborne anomalies. And I've got to say, the objects that I photographed, they're real.
Right. Well, you know, as a judge, which I am, I'm on the Kuala Lumpur War Crimes Tribunal, and we're holding a session later on in the year. I must say that you qualify as an expert witness, and I'm surprised that there hasn't been some commission or some body that hasn't called on your expertise, or have they?
Well, news agencies are calling on my expertise because obviously journalists who look at the data clearly see that the physical information all indicates that the objects are real. And you see, the problem becomes people who don't want to believe the objects are real. And what, again, that I was able to do was to show through a comparative analysis with other samples consistent with mine that these objects are the same. It was ironic, though, in 1991, during the deployment of the X-ray satellite, NASA photographed the same objects in space in 1991. So when I sent NASA the sample that I photographed in 2002, they didn't respond back. I wondered why. But then after getting the information from Dr. Edgar Mitchell, it clearly showed me that NASA knew that extraterrestrial life forms are real. They know this. They've been knowing this since the 60s. So they're withholding this information from the public because they don't believe the public is ready. But you see, Hollywood is preparing us for things to come with the Transformers and all these alien movies that are coming out. They're prepping us, and people now are more acclimated to the possibility that at some point we're going to be visited.
Right. What are some of the take us through kind of a typical week or a typical day, because you have so many uncertainties in your life. Say when you are called. Let's see, a day when you're called, like for the sighting over the White House.
You know, it's interesting. It always ends up the same way. I get this little voice telling me to go outside, take 20 pictures, point the camera this direction, and just fire. And every time I do that, it never fails. I get a specific sample, and not just one frame of it, but multiple frames of objects. See, it's harder to debunk a sample when, if, for example, I just had one frame, then we could possibly come up with alternative reasons and explanations as to how I got the sample. But when you start showing people 3, 4, 5, 94 samples of an object, it's impossible to debunk, and therefore it becomes a different ball game, especially for those people who are trying hard to disprove something. But in a situation like this, it just proves that it is an actuality, and it's impossible to disprove.
With regard to the objects, what are some of the characteristics in terms of their size, in terms of their properties, in that sort of thing?
Well, you know, I've got samples that are unlike what people want these objects to look like. You know, a lot of people, they're hell-bent on the object being a solid metal disc like the Day the Earth Stood Still from the 1950s movie, and they want it to be a flying saucer. And, you know, the objects that I'm photographing, some of them are as small as garden peas, and some of them, one particular sample shows an object that could be as large as New York City. So there's various sizes to these things, and no matter how big they are, they're all real.
Right, and people have said that on the principles of nanoparticles and also on the principles of interdimensional transfer, something that might appear very small coming through a wormhole actually can have very large dimensions in this
Exactly.
dimension.
Some of the objects, like I photographed the sphere above a lady's head shortly after I had the close encounter in 2002. And, you know, one of the things you have to consider is that the photograph shows an object the size of a marble. But if we go inside that object, it could be as large as New York City. But on the outside, it's the size of a small marble. So we have to look at the possibilities as micro, macro, and interdimensional capabilities of these objects. They may be small to us on the outside, but inside, we'd probably get lost if we were able to enter into one of these small objects. So we have to look at that as a possibility. Because it's small doesn't mean it's small.
Do you have personal memories of being on one of these spaceships?
Yes. I awoke one night. It's interesting. I would be in a room that has absolutely no light, but yet I would still be able to see myself. And without a light source, you'd start to wonder, how am I being lit if there's no light sources lighting me? But I would wake up in this very strange place, and then I'd fall back asleep, and I'd wake up again, and these people would be around me looking at me, and almost as if I'm being observed. And then I'd fall back asleep and I'd wake up back at home. And they're using transporter technology to do so.
Meaning that it's like you're being teleported from
exactly
from one area.
Exactly.
Do you have memory of what occurs to you or during those visits?
Actually, no. I'm not given any information. I'm not told anything. I'm not shown anything. It's very weird. Most of what I do get when it appears in my cameras is completely surprising to me, in the sense that I look at it as if I'm being enlightened to some very advanced technology, and I am. But other than that, other than I can show you the samples and what the samples look like and where the samples were imaged, I could not tell you anything as to why they appear in front of me.
What is the most remarkable case you think that you photographed?
You know, I've got to tell you, Alfred, almost everything that I photograph is pretty remarkable, so I can't tell you one in particular.
Yeah, so it's hard to...
Other than take a look at the stuff I've got on my website. It's all really strange stuff. But then how do I explain to people how I get these objects? Other than they show up and I have the physical representation of them, I can't tell you why. I can't tell you where they're from, what they're doing.
Right.
But they're here.
Right. Right. Okay. What message would you like to leave with our viewers and our readers? Because you are more than most of us in direct contact with this intelligence, and you're bringing information, direct information about them to us. And what message do you bring?
You know, again, I can't even answer that, Alfred, other than I'm showing you the physical facts that they do exist. So the message should be that the realities are that these anomalies and entities are real. That's the message. So we shouldn't think that we're the only sentient life form in this galaxy, because we're not. And the physical data clearly shows technology far more advanced than what we have in our airspace and in our presence at this very moment. We have to be aware it's there, but we just can't see it.
Good. Well, thank you very much. Now, since this is Washington, D.C., I just really want to get this very, very straight from you, that you do endorse the Extraterrestrial Disclosure Act of 2012, and that if we can get a briefing, just a private briefing with the staff or with the congressperson himself, we could go down to their office and have a
That would be wonderful, but you know, again, we have to get these people to be receptive because
Oh yeah,
again,
no, sure.
they don't want to believe it's real, and they're going to stick to their guns and thinking that it's not real, and they want to stick to what's been going on in the past with the level of disinformation that's out there. But when you start dealing with facts and the physical data like I'm showing, they start changing their tunes quickly, and a lot of them shut up really quick and not say anything after that. So I know the truth of the matter hits home hard, but a lot of people, even with the truth of the matter, they're you know, see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil mentality is going to hold them back from being forthcoming with the truth.
Yeah. Well, you know, with a countervailing thought is that we're now transitioning through a time as we go through 2011 and 2012 and years beyond where consciousness may evolve more and more, and where it'll be easier to hold, you know, advanced thoughts within unity consciousness than it was in prior years. So
it's becoming more open-minded, but still, Alfred, these people are not going to openly acknowledge this data. They're afraid to do that, and I don't know what it is that's holding them back from telling the truth, but there's just this veil that's covering everyone's eyes, and they can't lift that veil to show anyone the truth.
Oh yeah.
So I can't answer why they don't do that.
Well, I actually drove around downtown Toronto, Canada, with a sitting U.S. congressperson for about 2 hours, and all we talked about was the reality of UFOs and extraterrestrials, and he's a person who's sitting in the U.S. Congress now. So, you know, I think that there is some wiggle room that we might have.
Oh, we have wiggle room, and we do have people who will be more than willing to acknowledge the data, but those technically are not the people we want to acknowledge the data. The ones we want to acknowledge the data are the ones who are in the seat of power, and they're not going to do that.
Well, you know, our first breakthrough would be to get a bill introduced that would legislatively force these agencies to write an annual report, and you know, so this is an institutional matter, and once you get that institutional wheel going, where it becomes transpersonal, then they're not going to come up with a blank report.
Well, you know, they're not going to give you police reports either, and that's what's even more interesting, because the events that do take place are being witnessed by officers on duty at these specific agencies.
Yeah.
But once that report is made, where it goes, nobody knows. What happens afterwards, nothing. So it's there, but is there any action? I don't think so.
Okay, well, good. So let's see, you know, let's see what transpires out of this process.
Let's see.
Okay, good. Well, tell us where people can go to see all of the excellent work that you are continuing to do.
You can easily see my work at UFODC.com, and on my pages are all of my links, including my National Geographic page, which also has UFO samples on it. And there's Robert Stanley's books that are out, which are primarily based on the physical samples that I presented. I mean, my stuff's out there. All you've got to do is Google UFO DC, and you'll see the 50,000 pages come up. I mean, I'm out there, I'm visible, the material is well known. If it's accepted, that's another thing, especially by the people in power. So I got to say, just Google UFO DC, go to my website, UFODC.com. UFODC's Google, you'd see all the compliments that I'm getting from the various people around the world. And on Amazon.com, just Google UFO forensic files and take a look at my stuff.
Thank you deeply, Ron.
Thank you, Alfred.